rationalization is so important. Now, just to give you a little bit of background about me, is I was in the Marine Corps for 20 years, and then I retired, came out into industry, and started to work in supply chain management. And one of the key findings I had was there were people had thousands of vendors, thousands and thousands of vendors in their databases, and they were proud to say I got over 10,000 vendors, but at the same time, they only used about 300 to 500, depending upon what their real requirements were. So understanding who your good vendors are and which ones you can really count on is really important to have an efficient supply chain. So you're not spending a lot of time with vendors that really don't add value to what you're doing. And that's what we're going to talk about today is why vendor rationalization is so important so that you're able to be more effective in your RFP process. The reasons we have vendor rationalization and why it's so important is you want to qualify your vendors. Make sure they're qualified to meet your needs. You may have different needs in regards to quality, engineering needs, certification needs, so you want to qualify them off the bat. Make sure they're qualified. Make sure they have the capabilities you're looking for. And also find out what other capabilities they may have for you. So that's also important. So you're looking for qualifications and capabilities. Do they have the right quality? Do they have quality processes in place? So when you say you needed a specific quality, they can do that. Are they flexible? As you start to develop a relationship with a vendor, you're able to ask them to do things that may not necessarily be in the thing that you originally contracted them with, but they're able to be flexible and meet your needs. So if you have an urgent need, they can jump through hoops to meet those needs and make sure that they can do that. And of course, certification. Are they ISO 9000 certified? Do they have the right hazmat certifications? Do they have the right security certifications? You want to be able to keep track of all of this stuff in one single place so that you can easily and quickly find what you need when you need it. And you don't have to waste a lot of time figuring out who your best vendors are for a specific requirement. Managing your vendors. As I said before, managing them, find them in one place, one database. You just go in, type in a tag, and you're able to say, okay, these are all my vendors that can do this. These are all my vendors that have met this certification quality requirement. And are they responsive? Another place you can, keep track of that. How good a vendor are they? Are they a really great vendor or just somebody that just only meets the terms of the contract and nothing else? Which is great for that one requirement, but that's not really what you're looking for. You're looking for a strategic partner, somebody that's going to be with you for the long term and add value for the long term. And of course, excuse me, accuracy. Do you have the right contact information, mailing address, phone number, email, executives in that company, who's responsible for what, accurate information, because you can imagine the companies I've spoken about before, they have thousands and thousands of vendors that when they send an email out, it may only go to maybe 10% of those vendors. If that's actually true, the information is accurate. So you want to make sure you have accurate information about your vendors, that is actually accurate for that. And when you start to think about it, as you start to go through the reasons and why you want to have vendor rationalization and validate your vendors, is there's lots of benefits for that. One, you make sure you have the best suppliers to give you the best value. The best value is what we're always looking for. It's not always about the lowest price. Sometimes it's about, who can give you the on-time delivery you're looking for, who can give you the quality you need. And it's not always, again, about the price. It's about the best value that you can negotiate with your vendors through the RFP process. And that's what you want to do, is have an RFP process with good vendors, validated vendors, so you can really narrow it down to the specifics and not spend a lot of time jumping through hoops for things. You're going to have lower transaction costs because you don't have to spend as much time doing things. You can do an RFP within, set it up in a matter of, say, less than an hour, publish it to your vendors, receive the responses within 3 or 4 days, evaluate those responses over a day with, as long as your team's responsive to your needs, they know what they need to do, and then publish the award and then manage that contract all within one system so you can lower your transaction costs. Just imagine how you're doing it now with an Excel spreadsheet or an Access database or even a major ERP that has so many buttons to push that it's just confusing and time consuming. Instead, you want to, use a system that makes sense and lowers those costs so you can have volume aggregation and standardization. What do I mean by that? That means instead of going to, say, 10 vendors to buy 100 widgets, you go to 3 or 4 vendors and you buy 1,000 widgets at one time. The cost difference is going to be significant because you can go to a vendor and negotiate a volume contract. You can go in and say, hey, I don't need 10, I need 1,000. What's your price on 1,000? They'll say, oh, well, if you're going to buy 1,000, we can reduce that cost by 20 or 30%, depending upon what the item is. And then by having a standard item, something that you can use with multiple vendors, you can go to many different vendors, and that increases your competition. And when you increase competition, it brings people to the table that are serious about doing business with you, not looking for a one-time deal. They're looking for the long-term thing. And then you can even go beyond that one widget. You can go into the value-added activities. What do I mean by that? Warranties. Significant warranties that make sure that when you need something is there. If something breaks, they'll replace it immediately. Customer service. When you pick up the phone to call somebody, somebody's there to answer the phone. Um, on-time delivery, responsiveness in the middle of the night. Those are those value-added activities that make, one vendor much better than another vendor. And that's why you go through this rationalization process, so that you're able to identify who your best vendors are for any particular requirement. And that ends up reducing your risk for the long term. By reducing your risk for the long term, you're able to have more assurance that when you need something, it's there. When your operators need something to deliver to your customers, they have what they need. When your executives need something to deliver to the bigger market, they have what they need, and they understand, and they don't overextend themselves when they don't understand what the supply chain can really do. Those are the benefits. So what exactly am I talking about when I mean vendor rationalization or supplier rationalization? What is this all about? You want to make sure you have the right mix of vendors, ones that can do multiple things, not just one thing, and the right number. You don't want to try and manage thousands and thousands of vendors. You only want to keep it down to 10 to 20 very high quality vendors. And then when we go into the RFP process, which will be in our next video, I'll talk about procurement strategies, and which way you're going to go is based on the requirement and what's out there in the market. If you have lots of vendors, then you may want to go through some kind of reverse auction. Or if you have a few vendors that produce really high quality stuff, you want to go through this RFP process. Or if it's a complicated requirement, again, you're going to go through an RFP process that gets you the best value for the right term. Because when you have too many, you end up having fractured spend. What do I mean by that? I mean you're spending, say, $10 with 10 guys instead of $100 with one guy. And then if you talk about volume aggregation and standardization, which I mentioned before, you can start to say, I need, again, 100 widgets, give me your best price. They give you a 20% reduction. So instead of spending $100, now you're able to spend $80. Pretty simple example, but the idea there is that you're not spending very little amounts with multiple vendors. Instead, what you're doing is having a few vendors where you spend significant amounts. And again, they're your partners for the long term to do that. You cannot have economies of scale when you have when you have so many vendors, like the small volumes. You're not able to get that volume aggregation again. You can't leverage volume for the long term. And when we say volume, it's not just a one-time buy. You're talking about, say you go to a vendor every single month for 10 widgets. Every month you go to the same 3 or 4 vendors for that. Instead, you set up a 12-month contract with 1 or 2 vendors. And instead of getting 10 widgets a month, you get 50 widgets on contract for the entire year. And that's why you want to go through an RFP process to get the right person on that. And it all starts with your vendor rationalization, which means you're going to separate these guys into the right categories. So when you need services, you plug in services, they come up. When they need widgets, you plug in widgets, it comes up right away. You don't have to sort through thousands of vendors. And there's a lot of vendor databases out there that talk about thousands of vendors, that look at all the vendors I can help you with, and they think they're helping you, but in reality they're hurting you because they're confusing the situation. Instead, you want to go through a process where once or twice a year you go out and get the vendors who are currently on your list, and then open it up to other vendors who may be able to serve you, and you qualify them for the long term. And then for the next 12 months they're the vendors you use, and then the next 12 months you reset, you do it all again. It does 2 things. It brings in vendors that are fresh to your supply chain, as well as it brings in competition, which lets those vendors who are currently in place not to get too comfortable. They're not going to get comfortable and say, hey, I got this guy, I'm the incumbent, I'm going to go ahead and raise the price by 15%. You say, okay, I understand, 15%, that's great. I'm going to go ahead and take that price and share, and compete that with all the other prices. I'm like, wait a second, we don't want you to compete. We want to make sure we have your business for the long term. It's like, okay, well, I don't want to pay 15% more. Know that the market will pay actually probably 5% less. So let's do a deal that way, and you're able to leverage that competition, or that fear of competition, that your vendors don't want to compete with other people. So when you go through supplier categories, you're going to break them up into different categories. You're going to have approved. These are vendors that are approved to do business with you. They've gone through some type of very simple qualification. They're actually a business. They have a business license, and they've been in business for some length of time to the point that they can actually prove to you that they're actually in business. So they're just a very simple approved. They work out. They're preferred vendors. These are vendors that you like doing business with. They're the ones that, you're the ones you can call in the middle of the night. They're the ones that you can call and say, hey, I need something yesterday. And they'll jump through hoops to make sure that you get what you need because they're the ones you like doing business with and they like doing business with you. Because if you think about it, vendors also have choices. They can choose which customers to serve and which ones not to serve. And if you're one of their special customers, ones that they work with all the time, then you're the one that's going to be able to help them for the long term. Then you have partnered vendors. These are strategic partners. You may have some kind of strategic alliance with them where they give you a business advantage or they give you some kind of shared joint use of resources. They're partners for the long term. And that's the ultimate goal when you're using a system like this where you have the ability to track all these type of vendors, that you have strategic partners who are with you for the long term and they're not going to jump through hoops trying to, be there just for one deal. They're saying, hey, we're together for the long term. And I can share with you a story about one company where they meet with their vendors once a year. They go through their entire strategic plan for the next 5 years, and those vendors align with that strategic plan. They say, hey, we want to be with you for the long term. So in order to do that, we're going to have to take these actions, and that's what they do. Are they certified? Certification has a couple things because you have certified and certifiable, and you have two different things when you're looking at certified or certifiable. Certified would start first with what are your certification requirements? ISO 9000 certified, hazmat certified, security certified, whatever certification you need for that specific industry, that's step one. Then you have certification in regards to quality and the ability to meet your quality needs. That's where you're going to work with a vendor and certify them for the long term. So you're going to certify them and make sure that they're able to be there for you. And then they're certifiable. Okay. And when I say certifiable, they may be going through the process. And if they're going through the process, then they're able to meet your terms. And, if you know they're going through the process, maybe they're not quite there yet, but they just need a little bit more time. They're going to be there. So you're going to award to them now. And then knowing that they're going to meet that certification requirement in the future. And there's a whole class about certifying your vendors, what to look for, how to do that. And that's something we'll do in a later training. Okay. Pre-qualified, this is where you start to do an RFP or start to fulfill a requirement. You're going to pre-qualify them. Are they the right kind of business for this RFP? Are they the right kind of business in regards to size, quality, experience, all the different things? So you're going to pre-qualify them, and that's what you do during this vendor rationalization process. You do the preliminary, they're good to go, and then when you start to do an RFP, you send out another notice to where you kind of pre-qualify them. Say, hey, we're getting ready to do this. This is the kind of business that we're looking for. And let me know if you can participate. Pre-qualify them. And of course, you want to track the vendors that are disqualified or debarred from your organization, ones that you don't want to do business with anymore for whatever reason. Okay. And then we have the diversity category. This is significant in the United States because in the United States, we have many diverse businesses. We have woman-owned businesses, minority-owned businesses, veteran-owned businesses, businesses they call 8A certified or in a hub zone, or Native American or Alaskan Native American. These are all businesses that have a special advantage in federal contracting or public contracting to where they can compete. And if you have those kind of requirements in your business, in your organization, then you want to be able to track that and easily recall those vendors and make sure that you can tap into them at the push of a button. So that's where you have the different categories that you're looking for when you're categorizing your vendors. And then we go through the process of supplier segmentation. So you start to set it up. We know the opportunity, the reasons why we want to do supplier segmentation. We talked about the benefits. We talked about how we're going to categorize our vendors. And then we're going to go through the segmentation process. Think about next is, what happens if I don't do this? What are the challenges and problems that I may encounter if I don't go through a segmentation process and really refine my database into something that I can easily recall who I want to do business with? Well, you're going to have no focus on value, meaning you're going to be looking at lowest price, not necessarily best value. You're going to be jumping through hoops to make things happen instead of consciously and proactively building a relationship for the long term. That's the difference. You don't know who you're working with, and you have too many vendors to manage, and you're always just throwing a bunch of spaghetti on the wall and hoping to see something sticks. Instead, you can start to, build a long-term strategic relationship. And that's the other advantage when you don't segment. You're always working with so many, you can't develop a relationship. It's hard to, meet and talk with somebody in a quality conversation when you're meeting with hundreds of people. But when you're meeting with 5 or 10 in a particular category, then you start to build a relationship. And why is a relationship so important? Because it can be there for the long term. And you don't want to have poor management. Too many people, too many things, too many irons in a fire, somebody's going to get burned. And you don't want to have that. That's why you want to segment out. Now, how do you do that? When we talk about tactics, we're talking about how do you get it done. First, you identify the criteria. We talked about how to categorize them a moment before. We talked about reasons to do this. And now you want to come up with your specific criteria based on your business and your requirements. You're going to have requirements that you're doing constantly and consistently. The widgets, you know what the widgets are, you know who the widget providers are. Those are the businesses, and you're going to come up with some criteria there. You may have services, janitorial services, or IT services. You're going to come up with a criteria for that particular requirement, and you're going to start to segment that way. Look at different categories. Competencies. What kind of competencies do they have? What kind of capabilities they have? These 3 areas, you talk about competencies, categories, and capabilities, and that's how you're going to separate your businesses, because then you start to build your team internally. They can manage one specific category or very specific categories, and they become experts in those areas. They know which vendors to work with, what their competencies are in that particular category, and then what other things they can also do for you. Could you imagine having a vendor that can do 3 or 4 or 5 different things for you versus just one thing? It comes up to be a much more strategic relationship. Then you're going to assess their potential. What type of vendor is this? Is this a one-off vendor, or is this a vendor that I'm going to have together for a long time? Is this a long-term relationship, something that is transactional, collaborative, and strategic? Transactional is a one-time deal. Okay, they process the transaction, we're done. That may be something for you have lots of competition and a requirement that's very easy to fill. Collaborative, do they work with you? Do they meet with you to discover your true needs? Do they, try to align your needs? Just like we talk about in some of our leadership program, is aligning with needs and collaborating to come up with a win-win solution. And then, are they strategic for the long term? Are they working with you for the long term? They're always going to be with you trying to meet your needs, or just something that's just kind of, okay, this is a one-time deal as well. And then you want to assess their strategic value. And how we do that is to classify our vendors using this ABC model. And this is something you can put in the system and tag it. You can say, these are my A vendors, my B vendors, and my C vendors. A vendors are high value, B vendors are mid-level value, and then C are a low value. And you start to categorize these vendors, and you build a strategic sourcing capability versus a tactical purchasing capability. The difference is tactical, you're just jumping through hoops, buying, no matter what the requirement is. Strategic sourcing, you're looking for the long term, not just for the one-off, one deal year today. It's every year for the many years to follow in the future. That's the ultimate goal of developing a strategic sourcing team, and you want to make sure you have the right tools to